Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on how to prepare for ABC's Practitioner Written Multiple Choice Exam. My name is Jim Lawson, and I'm Outreach Development Manager for ABC and your host for this webinar. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Steve Fletcher, CPO. Steve is ABC's Director of Professional Credentialing. Now, Steve wears many hats at ABC. He directs ABC's professional ethics, the scope of practice, and government relations programs. He also facilitates coordination in professional and clinical issues all across ABC's program, including state licensure. But what's most important for us today is that Steve manages all of ABC's certification exam development and administration activities. Steve, thank you so much for joining us and to talking about Practitioner O&P Written Multiple Choice Exam.
Very glad to be here, Jim.
Great. So what are we doing this webinar? Why are we doing this webinar? Well, to become a certified orthotist, you must pass the ABC prosthetic and orthotic board exams. Now, our goal today is to help those taking the O&P Written Multiple Choice Exam to have a better understanding of the exam process and to understand best how to prepare. We want you to pass the exam on the first attempt. We definitely want that. Now, we also want to share with you some of the tips on success to taking the exam. Steve, are you ready to start?
Yes, I am. I've been excited about this webinar. I believe this will be a good resource for those preparing to take the exam.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you so much. Now, I know that ABC wants everyone to be prepared and successful as they take this O&P exam. So why don't we take a closer look at the written exam and why it's so important?
Yes, I think for me, Jim, one of the main reasons that we thought this would be a good topic for this webinar is the recent performance by candidates on this exam. We have seen, unfortunately, a slight decline in the overall passing rates on this exam over the last few years. It's pretty unclear to us what is exactly driving the decline in the overall passing rate. We have thought about things such as, did the COVID pandemic have an impact? Did the way schools had to adopt to sort of a whole new environment a couple of years ago, did that play a role? It's really hard to know, Jim, so we're not clear. Our goal here is just to make sure that candidates have a clear picture of what to expect as they prepare and then take the exam.
Very good. Now, Steve, let me ask you this. Let's talk about the prerequisite for taking the exam. So how does it differ from the other practitioner exams?
Yeah, it is unique in that the eligibility criteria that was introduced back in 2019 is different than the other exams, the simulation and the CPM exams. The eligibility to take the written exam is that as soon as someone has graduated from their master's degree program, they are eligible to take the exam. It used to be that people had to have completed their residency before taking the written exam. But when the exam was combined to include both O&P and the eligibility changed, now students, as soon as they graduate, are eligible to take it. Really what this meant for us by changing the eligibility is that the exam needed to be redesigned. As I said a moment ago, in the past, you had to have completed a residency before you could take the exam. So that was taken into consideration when the exam was developed. Now that you don't have to meet that requirement, we redesigned the exam. And specifically, we redesigned what we call the test content outline for the exam, sometimes called a test blueprint. Part of that process was to take into consideration that candidates taking the exam will not have done a residency. And so that meant the weighting of the content needed to shift a bit, especially shift away from the domains of continuation of the treatment plan or follow-up and practice management, and emphasize in a greater way in the exam the domains of patient evaluation and formulation of the treatment plans. So I'm sure we're going to get into more details about this in a minute.
Okay, well, that brings up a good question here. You have told us that they're eligible to take the exam. The candidates are eligible as soon as they complete their master's degree. When do you suggest taking the combined O&P written multiple choice exam?
Glad you asked that, Jim, because we would absolutely recommend that candidates take the exam as soon as they can after they graduate from their program. We've done some analysis, and it shows that a candidate who takes the exam soon after graduation is more likely to pass the exam than one who waits, especially those individuals who decide to wait an extended period of time, let's say more than 9 months or even a year after they graduate. So we always advise individuals, don't wait. Take it as soon as it is feasible for you to take when you graduate.
Good. All right. That makes sense, Steve. Now, I'd like to take a look, and I know ABC on our website has numerous exam prep materials for the candidates. So can we discuss some of those resources? Can we discuss them specific to the exam? Are there any that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I, there's multiple resources as you're about to show them. So I think we should just jump in.
Great. Let's go ahead and take a look at those. Let's go to the ABC website. All right, here we are at abcop.org. Now, I'd like to tell everyone that at the end of this webinar, we're going to remind them that where all of these resources are, and we're going to discuss these. Okay, I'll come back to them and we'll show you all of that. But right now, let's go to the website. This is abcop.org live, and we'll walk through the resources now. Let's start here with the individual certification. As you can see my cursor, I'm going to start here. Right? It pulls up the Get Certified on the right-hand side. We're going to go down to that. And then all the way below that, we're going to go to Exam Prep. There's a lot of materials in here, so let's hit Exam Prep. And that takes us to right here, Explore Exam Prep Material by Discipline. And today we're going to focus on the orthotist, prosthetist. We have all the other disciplines there, but let's go ahead and focus on this right here. We'll click on that. Now, here we are, the Practitioner Exam Prep. Steve, which one would you like to start with?
How about we start with the test content outline?
Okay, very good. Right here, combined written test content outline. Let's click on that.
Okay, well, here's what I would focus on while we're looking at this resource, Jim. This is exactly what the title is, the outline of the content that is contained in the written multiple choice exam. Most individuals who are getting ready to take their exam, who have just graduated from their master's program, are very familiar with the practice domains. And you can see there's two of them showing on the screen, the first two domains, patient evaluation and formulation of the treatment plan. We'll look at all of them in a moment, but as we're on this part of the document, what I want to highlight is the percentage number after each of the domain titles. You can see it says 34% after patient evaluation and 25% after formulation. That means that 69% of the exam content is going to be in these two practice domain areas. If you scroll a little, Jim, and we can just quickly show them that the
Sure.
implementation is also 25% of the exam. But when you get to domains 4 and 5, continuation of the treatment plan or follow-up and practice management, you can see that it's a much smaller percentage of the exam, 10% and 6%. That means, for example, that only 6% of the content in the entire exam covers practice management information. If you would scroll back to the top for one moment, Jim, and if you look at patient evaluation as an example, it's not only just telling you that that domain has a majority or a good large percentage of the content in the exam, but there are lots of bullet points or subdomains, we call them, that describe what is involved with patient evaluation. And there's too many words for me to read here, but the second bullet has a lot of information that drives exam content. You can see it says diagnosis right there in the middle of the second sentence. So any questions in the exam that asks about specific diagnoses or pathologies is going to be a patient evaluation kind of a question. So I think that's helpful for people to just begin to organize how they're going to start studying and preparing for the exam.
So when they're prepping for the exam itself, as you mentioned earlier, these first two domains, the first three domains, are really kind of the main meat of the exam, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's 84% of the exam. That's like almost all of the exam is in those three domains. There are questions in the others for sure, but that is not where you would spend, for example, I would not advise an individual who's studying for the exam to spend a lot of time studying practice management material. It's only 6% of the exam, and that's going to not do them a benefit. They should focus on these three domains for sure.
Very good. So this is a great resource to begin with. Thanks for sharing that, Steve. The O&P written multiple choice exam is usually the first ABC exam taken by the practitioner candidates, most of the time, meaning that generally the candidates have never taken an ABC exam. So what do you suggest they use to get a feel for this examination, the style, the structure, basically kind of how the questions are asked? What should we
That's a
look at
great
next?
question. I think we should go to the sample questions. Let's
Okay, scroll down. Here we go.
yeah, right
Sample
there you
orthotic and
go.
prosthetic written questions.
Um, so this is obviously pretty straightforward. These are just sample questions. They're not actual questions from the exam. I hate to break that to people. But these are very similar to what they will see on the exam. We're looking at the orthotic page. There's a prosthetic page you can see on the contents on the left.
There we go.
Um, but if you go back to the orthotic page just for a moment, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, so one thing I'd really like to emphasize here, Jim, is that um, it is exactly what we call this exam. It is a multiple choice written exam. That means there are not going to be other types of problems on the exam. They're all going to be multiple choice questions, just like you're seeing on the screen. There won't be any questions that are true false. There will be no questions that are fill in the blank or essay questions. All of the questions are in this format. The question is asked. We call that the stem, but that's the question. And then there are four choices, A, B, C, D. That is the format of all the questions on the exam. So that is sort of first and foremost. I know it sounds oversimplified, but I do get questions from people to say, are there like true or false or fill in the blank? And no, there are not. The other thing I think that is helpful, this resource, is to look at the types of questions are here and kind of get a feel. I would even advise if you're going to this resource for the first time that you work through these questions and try to answer them. And then when you finish, there's 10 of them, I believe, there is a key at the bottom that will tell you what the correct answers are. That will give you at least a small little idea about where you are. And these aren't meant to be representative of all the content of the exam. They're just sample questions. But it would still give you an idea if there are multiple questions in different content areas that you really didn't know the answer to, that's where you need to focus your preparation.
Steve, I did notice on some of these questions, for example, the first question, it says the muscle that has primary. Now I'm looking at the word primary. That is emphasized. That is all caps. That is a much larger font than the rest of the question. On the exam, are questions asked like that? Do they have things like that in there?
They do. I'm glad you brought that up. You can see even in the number two that the term most is all caps. On the exam, by the way, and it's not true here for the sample, those words that are in all caps will also be bolded.
Oh, very
And
good.
the reason we do that is that we want the test taker to understand that there's some important element, context to the way the problem is phrased. That first one is written the way it is because the question is asking which muscle has primary responsibility of doing that action, because that muscle may do other things too, because a lot of muscles in the body, Jim, have a couple of different functions. They primarily do one action, but they may also contribute to another. So that's what is trying to make it very clear to the test taker. We're looking for just what the primary action is of that muscle.
Very good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the resource titled Most Common Combined Written Exam Orthotic Diagnosis and see the benefit of using that to prepare for the exam. Let's take a look at that here. Let's see here.
I think you
Oops,
had it on the
sorry.
right there, right
Yep,
there on the right,
there we
Jim.
go. Let's pull this up.
Yes, this list is a fairly newer resource. This has only been in place for a couple of years, actually. And what we do each year, by the way, the exam changes each year. There's a new form of the exam each calendar year that we work on. And so each year when we create the new form, then we go and we do a little analysis to say what are the most common diagnoses that are represented in the exam. This is not again, this is just a guide, not meant to be a definitive list of here's all the diagnoses that are included. That is not what this is saying. It is saying these are the most common, and they're sort of in rank order. And in other words, from the top to the bottom,
That's important.
there are more yes, there are more questions about scoliosis than there are about polio. I mean, that the easiest way to interpret this. Um, as you go down the list, obviously there are less and less questions on the exam with that thing. So again, what I said a moment ago, should you spend hours and hours and hours studying about polio? Probably not, because it is not a a diagnosis that you're going to run into at the exam as often as the ones at the top of the list.
Okay, so now just this may be a silly question. Is there a list for the most common diagnoses for prosthetics?
We do not have that list, and we think it's fairly self-explanatory that prosthetic content is focused on limb loss, on
Hmm.
replacing a limb. So it just did not, yeah, there's not diagnoses, so to speak, as much in play. We get a lot of feedback from folks, and we agree. Orthotics is a little harder to study for because it's broad. There's a lot of things. I mean, look at that list of diagnoses, Jim. That's a lot of material right
Oh
there.
yeah.
So that's why this resource was developed, because we understand that do I have to know everything about these 15 diagnoses? No, that we just you need to understand the emphasis, and that's what this is about.
Oh, very good, very good. So let's go ahead and take a look at another resource. Let's move to the combined written exam results. So let's see, right over here, the combined written exam results. Now, what I do is I speak to the students at the universities a lot, and when I speak to the candidates about taking their O&P written multiple choice exam, I bring this material up. I bring this piece up.
Yes, this resource, as it sort of as you will see, I mean, as it is in the description, it says there right at the beginning, if you received your test results only to learn that you did not pass, the following information may help focus your study. If you have never taken an exam before and you read that, you may go, oh, well, this isn't for me. That's not correct. This is
Mm,
for you still, because this resource, I think, is even a little more helpful than the sample questions. And here's why I think is. If you will scroll a little bit, Jim, you will see
sure.
that we have additional sample questions that are now categorized by the domain. A few minutes ago, we talked about the test content outline, and we showed that 34% of the exam is in the patient evaluation um, domain. I think it's a fair question for a candidate to say, well, what does ABC mean by patient evaluation? What exactly does that mean? Or what does ABC mean by practice management? Well, here's the resource to go to get a little more insight into that. The questions, the sample questions that are in this resource are all labeled of what type of domain they are tied to. So when you look at these questions, you will say, oh, that's what formulation of the treatment plan, that's the type of question that I will run into when I take my exam. I think this is a really great resource to focus, not just for people who were unsuccessful and need to work on a particular area, but for people attempting the exam for the first time. One other quick note I'd like to make is that there's also a description, a little bit of a broader description of what each domain is. And so there's a lot of words there, we understand, but I would encourage candidates to read that to just get a better sense, get a good context of what what types of knowledge do I need to know about. And so I think having that description there is also helpful.
Yeah, Steve, these are really great, the materials you put together for this. Um, they're really giving everyone a good feel of what the exam's going to be like. I think that right there is so helpful. So let's go ahead and discuss how the exam is created. How does the ABC exam committees create the questions for the exam? What resources do they consult?
Well, Jim, it really always starts with a practice analysis. And
Oh,
so the
very good.
practice analysis of certified practitioners, which you're opening up, which is great, is a big resource. It's got a lot of information there. And but that's the foundation of any exam development. Um, just briefly, a practice analysis is done every 5 to 7 years or so, depending on what's going on in the environment. Um, the way we go about this is that we contact all ABC certified prosthetists and orthotists, and we ask them to fill out a very comprehensive survey. It's a doozy, I'll have to admit. It's a very comprehensive survey. It takes quite a while to do. We ask them to basically tell us, what do you do every day? Um, Sometimes we refer to it as taking a snapshot of what the profession looks like today. That's why we do it every 5 to 7 years, to just capture changes in the profession. It takes a very in-depth look at the profession. It looks at a lot of things that aren't directly related to exam development. It looks like at demographics of the profession, the years of experience, the age of people who are in the profession, and the settings, the type of settings that they work in, all those kinds of things. But a big part of it is, how do you practice? What do you do every day? What do you spend the most time doing? How does your day as an orthotist filled? It also asks the survey takers, what do they think is the most important? What's most critical? And we ask a lot of questions like that. The results of that survey is what is used to create the test content outline that we looked at earlier. Um, we didn't just have a couple of guys in a room that says, hey, let's make patient evaluation 34%. That's just not the way it works. It is a very structured, formal process that takes the results of that very comprehensive survey, and then those results create the breakdown of what the exam should be made of.
Very interesting. And I would assume that the practice analysis from 30 years ago is very different than the one from today.
It is quite a bit different. It changes with time and technology and practice styles and all of that. Jim, can we take a second to look at one of the resources in the practice
Sure.
analysis
Which
that
one?
you referenced earlier? If you scroll down the content on the left and you look at orthotic prosthetic, excuse me, practice areas, the next one down, and open that up for a minute. You asked a moment ago, well, isn't there a common diagnosis in the prosthetic side? And my answer was no, we don't do that. We don't, because this is what drives that. If you scroll just a little bit more, you can see that this is a breakdown of the percentage of time that prosthetists spend by practice area. And so you see there, if you scroll up just a little, Jim, I think we cut off, there you go. You can see that um, transtibial is half of the time that process spend doing patient care is with transtibial um, patients. About
Well,
26% transfemoral, and it goes down from there.
let me guess which ones are the most used on the exam.
You got it. And so this goes across all of our exams, to be honest. I know we're focusing on the written multiple choice exam for this webinar, but this practice areas breakdown is how we create the simulation exam problems and the CPM exam as well. So as an individual is prepping for the written multiple choice exam, this can guide your study. Look at the percentages, and I hate to pick on it, but shoulder disarticulation down at the bottom, 0.4%. Are there going to be a bunch of questions about shoulder disarticulation prostheses on the exam? No, there's not.
Very good. Let's take a look at other resources. Which would you like to go to next?
Um, we could look at the top 10 references used on the combined exam.
Okay, that'll be beneficial.
This is something that was developed again just a couple of years ago, that is updated each year again as we do a new form of the exam. This was a request actually from the educator, the group of educators, the master's program educators. We have a lot of dialogue with the educators. We have a very good relationship with them, and sort of go back and forth. And over time, they had asked about some resource in this type. So we did the work and did some analysis and came up with what are the most used references for problems on the exam. And again, this is simply sort of a top 10 kind of list, if you will, to say here are the references that are used most often on the exam.
Very good. Very good. Let's go ahead. You had brought up one of the things on the practice analysis was the practice analysis. I noticed this practice analysis resident guide. Let's take a look at that. So the practice analysis is so important, it even needs a guide to use it. Am I correct?
Well, this is just distilling down a very lengthy sort of academic, if you will, report to usable bits of information.
Okay. Very good.
Um,
Very good.
I think this is obviously, you can see geared towards the resident, sort of, and so I understand, and we said a moment ago that you're eligible to take this exam before you do your residency. What we find, Jim, most often is that people are usually in the middle of their first residency when they are taking the combined written exam.
Okay.
So this still is a good resource, just to look at the areas, of practice that they should be focused on. If you click on perhaps the bottom one on the contents page, analysis of current practice composition, you will see that this is a repeat, a little bit of what we saw just a moment ago in the practice analysis. It's just kind of pulling that information out of the whole practice analysis report. It has that prosthetic practice area we just talked about. It has the orthotic one as well. I think that's helpful. It's not a specific resource, that's called out in the exam prep page, but it's the same type of an idea. Lower extremity is more than half of what orthotists typically do, and upper extremity, for example, is only 8%. So that should help, sort of organize your thinking when you're looking at studying for the exam.
Very good. Now, I'm sure we have other resources to take a look at. Let's see, let me go back to this. Just navigating here. What about, I think I saw the exam reference and recommended reading list.
Yeah,
Let's
you
see.
could just open that up. It's right on the top middle
Sure.
there. This is a much bigger list, so that's why we pulled out the most common references used. But this is the entire sort of list, if you will. I don't know if we have time to really dig into this, but it just is good for I think people to just review this to see if there's something there that they have not consulted. You can see a little above your cursor is the Code of Professional Responsibility, ABC's code. That's a
Sorry.
reference.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is one that, people should be familiar with. There may be practice management type questions on the exam that are referenced in the code. That's just one example of just being familiar with these lists. And so I don't know if we want to dig too deep into this. Another one down a few bullets is the scope of practice itself, the orthotics, prosthetics, and pedorthic scope of practice. That's a reference that we potentially have questions on the exam about.
And those are all that the scope of practice is available on our website. You can download it at any point. The same with the Code of Professional Responsibility as well.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Now, Steve, I think we've seen the majority of resources on ABC's website for this exam, but do you have any other advice for those preparing for the exam or for those who are helping candidates prep?
I do, Jim. I think people should consider reviewing really basic test taking principles. Um, Numerous references for exam prep and reducing exam anxiety study tips, are available out there on the internet. There's all sorts of materials. Um, One thing you can always consider taking an exam review course or purchasing. There is exam prep materials for purchase. They're available from multiple sources. I just have to make one statement. ABC really does not sponsor or endorse any review or prep course materials or any prep course that they may pay for. But that might be helpful for some individuals who really struggle with any kind of test they take. So that's just something we like to make sure is clear. Um, I know that you visit master's programs each year, Jim, and you talk to a large number of groups of students. And, you and I talk, and I know you share with me that there's like a lot of groupthink there, a lot of camaraderie with the cohorts. And so I think that's something to consider after you graduate. That doesn't have to go away. Small exam study groups are really helpful for some individuals because everyone comes at this from their own individual perspective. And when you can sort of pool your resources, pool the different perspectives together, I think it helps your confidence. And just one of your study buddies, if you will, is going to be focusing on a different area that you didn't even think about, and that's going to help you. And so I think it really improves your chances at the exam if you have others that you are going through at the same time, and set aside some time to schedule, sort of study periods or some time a way to connect to say, well, what are you working on? How are you doing your prep? And I think it's beneficial.
Well, very good. So let me ask this question. What about seasoned professionals? What are your thoughts about candidates reaching out to them for help?
I think that's another really good idea. And as I said a moment ago, most people who are getting ready to take the exam are in the middle of their first residency. So they are around seasoned clinicians. Um, I think the candidates residency directors, their mentors, really any credentialed, practitioner is always a really good resource to help prep for the exams. You know, some of the practitioners they're going to be interacting with it's been a few years since they've taken their exams, so they're not going to maybe be so in touch with it, but they still have a lot of knowledge that they have accumulated over the years, so it would be very valuable to ask them questions. I know, Jim, that some practices, they really have a structured system where they have residents give weekly presentations, let's say on a specific diagnosis. um, an example that comes to mind is a diagnosis. I'll just call this one out: a posterior tibial tendon dysfunction, or PTTD. Um, what they ask the resident to do is say, all right, on Friday you have to give us a presentation. What is that diagnosis? What are the clinical signs? What's the treatment protocols, et cetera? And that forces the resident to go and do a little research and be ready to give a little presentation. That would be excellent exam prep. Um, you know
Excellent.
what? Before we move on, Jim, I want to go back to another test taking tip, if I might.
Sure.
I hear often from candidates that they get in trouble, when they start to second guess themselves. They read a question, they think they know the answer, they kind of have the initial thought, and then they start reading it again and they start having second thoughts. I have found that so often, or more often than not, the first instinct is is really what you should go with, and is more often the correct answer. That's not always true, but that I think is true a lot. I hear from candidates that they were so nervous that they went through the exam really fast. They just sort of like when their anxiety and nervousness starts to raise, their speed starts to increase too. Nerves can do that. You really have to try to remain calm. You want to take your time, just to slow yourself down a little bit. There really is more than enough time to complete the exam. We look at that. We see how many candidates really used up all the time, and it's a very, very small percentage. Almost all candidates have extra time at the end, so you shouldn't feel rushed. I would even tell candidates that if they should read the question two or three times if they have to. You were great to highlight that some questions have words that are all caps and bolded. If you see that after you've read the question once, stop, go back, see where it said where that all caps and bolded word was, and make sure you understand the concept. What is it? What does that mean to the question? Then read the question again. I think it'll be very helpful. Another thing is to read all the choices before you click on anything. You need to see what are all the choices. Remember, all the questions have four choices. There's not going to be a question that has six or seven choices, all the above or none of the above. We're not going to do that to you. So you have a chance to read all the choices before you make your decision, and click on the choice that you think is correct.
But when you look at the choices and you see letter A, oh, I know that's it. Read the rest. Read the rest. Letter A may not be it. There may be another choice that is more specific to the answer, right?
That's exactly right. It is so easy to read sort of chronologically in a problem. You read the question, then you get to A, and that looks pretty good, and you're ready to choose it. Don't do that. Read B, then C, and then D, and then go back and read A again and go, yeah, I'm convinced now that A is the right answer. I always found it easy to or a successful strategy is to eliminate choices. There's only four.
Sure.
Uh, and so you can easily say, well, I've read the question twice. I've now read all four options. You know what? I know option D, the fourth option, is definitely not right. So that one's out. Now I'm really only have three options that I'm looking at. And I'm pretty sure B is not correct too. Yeah, now I read it again, I know B. So now I'm really down to A and C. If you're able to do that pretty systematically, then you really there's only a 50%, you have a 50-50 shot, even if you're not 100% sure. So all of that are just test taking techniques to get you to really focus. Don't let the situation, if you will, overwhelm you to where, I have to pass this exam. Take each question individually and take your time.
Very good. Well, so let's stick with that. Let's go. Here's an example of a question on the exam, okay, or not on the exam, but an exam question. Can you explain why the correct answer is most appropriate, but maybe a little more importantly, even Steve, why the others are not most appropriate in this question?
Yeah, I actually put it even a different way there,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
and because it does say which would be the most appropriate, and that most is important. In other words, what would be the best way to treat this situation? So, this is not an actual exam question. Again, I'll just make sure
Right, right.
that's clear. It's a sample question. Patient presents with severe hyperextension of their knee. They have no other pathologies. Which orthosis would be the most appropriate? Well, right away I can see that there are two choices that are an AFO type of a device, and there are two choices that are a KFO type of device. So I can quickly say, well, if the problem that the patient's having is they have severe hyperextension of the knee, we probably have to deal with that with a KAFO, because would an AFO really treat it most appropriately? And so choice B, AFO with a posterior stop set at neutral. Um, the students should know their biomechanics that would try to resist the knee from going into hyperextension. But is that the most appropriate way? No, that's still only an AFO. device ends below the knee, so it's not going to be the most appropriate. So if I am thinking that way, I can eliminate A and B right away without even worrying about all the elements of A and B. An AFO wouldn't be the most appropriate. So now I'm down to C and D, and I see that C says a KAFO with drop locks and solid ankle trim lines. Okay. And then D says KFO with posterior offset knee joints and free motion trim lines. It should say ankle joint, but just as a sample. What this really is helping me or causing me to decide is which one of these design elements is more appropriate for this person. So I go back to the question and say they have severe hyperextension of the knee. They have no other pathologies. Oh, okay. So then choice C says that I'm going to put them in a solid ankle trim lines. Um, that wouldn't be appropriate because they don't have any other pathologies. They just need a brace and orthosis to deal with the hyperextension of their knee. So that means that really the correct answer is D. That's addressing their problem, but not over addressing something that they don't need.
Very good, Steve. Thank you for walking us through that. It makes a lot of sense. Now, those are some really great ideas, and you shared with us many of the resources to help prepare for the exam, including this example here. Do you have any other ideas that can be helpful while sitting for the exam? I'm picking your brain
Uh,
now.
okay. Um, well, there's several things that I just want to sort of go over the whole process of how you like begin and you
Good.
engage with ABC. This is going to be a little more administrative, Jim, but I think it still will be helpful just to get this sort of described. Um, First of all, you have to apply online. That's the way you apply for this exam. It's all an online application. There's no paper applications any longer. So it's using your MyABC account. You log on to the website, and it's very clear how to apply for an exam. Um, Once you kind of begin that process, you'll be submitting the documents that are required, and then you will be approved to take the exam. Just want to mention briefly that there's more than 350 test center locations across the country where you can take your exam. So hopefully, unless you live in a very rural setting, you will be able to get to a test center location somewhere fairly local to where you're living. Um, I will also sort of just mention that it is now an option to take your exam via a remote proctored mechanism. This is fairly new. That means you can potentially take your exam at home on your computer. There are lots of security requirements. The computer has to have sort of minimal updated software, obviously, to handle the software of taking the exam. You have to have you have to have a private space that no one else is there. You can't have any other people in the space. You have to have a clean desk. You have to do a room scan with your webcam. There's a lot of elements to doing a remote. It's not just log on to a website and take your exam. It's a process, but it is available. And there are certainly some number of people who take advantage of that if it's just a hardship to get to a testing center. I've talked to many people who think, I would do the remote proctor exam at my house, but I'd be distracted. It would be hard. I'd rather just go to a testing center, be checked in, go to a private cubicle area that I can really focus on taking the exam. So that just is on the individual's preference. The exam, just to remind people, is 200 questions. You have 3.5 hours to take the exam. Um, the basics, Jim, of of doing it on a day where you've really set aside the day to do the exam. And it's not something you're squeezing in between running to the hospital to see a patient or running to a skilled nursing facility, and you're going to take your exam in the middle of that. That wouldn't be a good idea.
Right.
You have to set aside time to do it, have breakfast, get up, have a good night's sleep the night before. It's not the night before is not the time to go out and party, obviously, and be really awake and alert and ready to go. And so those are some of the things that I would sort of just hit. Um, you know, again, I'll just go back to one other quick thing, Jim, about those bolded all caps words that they'll see in a question. There are going to be, there's not a lot of them, but there are going to be some questions that might have the word except or not. Those are in particularly critical for people to pay attention. And here's an example. There may be a question. Again, I want to emphasize there's not a lot of them, but there may be a few that will read a scenario and say, which of the following, all of the following would address this problem except. So now you are actually thinking in a 180 degrees different way. So the problem is saying the choices that you have, all of them will address this person's problem except one of these. So now you are looking amongst those four choices to the option that won't treat the condition described in the problem. People do get that a little mixed up, unfortunately, because they see the problem and then they read the choices and they immediately see, oh, that one won't do it, or that one will. Like choice A will treat this problem, and they didn't catch the except, so they get that problem wrong because the problem didn't say which of the following would treat this problem. It said which of the following, all of the following will treat it except which one. And they just didn't read the question carefully. And when they didn't see the except, they're choosing one that will treat the problem, not the one that is being asked which one would not treat the problem.
Does that seem to happen more often? And when I talk to candidates who have taken the exam, it seems to be they get in a groove and they're zipping through the test and they're just bang, 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 answering the questions. And I haven't had anyone tell me that they ran out of time for the exam. I haven't run across that person yet. So the advice you're giving us is take your time, read the question, right? Read the question.
And I totally agree. And let me add one other quick comment, Jim. It kind of relates to having enough time. If you come to a question that you feel like really you don't know, you're like thrown, um, and you should flag it. You have the ability to flag the question and come back to it. You do not have to, struggle through answering a question that you really don't know the answer to and get stuck on that. Flag it to come back at the end, continue to keep, a good perspective, move on to the next question, and you will have time at the end to do that. As you put up some things on the screen there, absolutely there are no trick questions. That is not the goal of this exam, is to see if we can catch you with a tricky question. That is not true, I can assure you. All of the questions are straightforward. They all are asking about some knowledge or information that you should know. And there is one clearly correct answer and three not correct answers to every question. That's, and even if there's any nuance, that's why we use words like what is the most appropriate or the best option. And that should help you to navigate the question.
Very good. I've had some candidates tell me that they've got to a question like, for example, number question 38. They get to question 38 and man, they just don't understand what the answer is on that. And they don't recall what that was. And so they will flag it and continue on and get to question 120. And all of a sudden in something question 120 will open that mind. It'll ring a bell and go, oh, that's what they were asking about. Now I remember. And so they'll flag it and be able to go back and answer the question later. I've run into that situation before.
I agree. And sometimes when you just read and get through more and you have some more success, your brain calms down a tiny bit. Then you go back and go, oh, now I see it. Why was I not seeing this before? It can be that simple, Jim.
And Steve, does every question need to be answered?
It does. If you don't answer a question, if you just say, I don't know, I'm going to skip it and go by, and then you don't go back, that'll be counted as an incorrect answer. I mean, it's not like you can just skip it and it doesn't count. You
Okay.
have to answer each question. So questions that are left unanswered will be counted as an incorrect response.
This is great information, Steve. I want to go back real quick to abcop.org and show everyone where these materials are. Now we're back to the website, abcop.org. And Steve, I'm going to walk through very quickly again where all these resources are found that we discussed today. So we go to individual certification, down to get certified, then scroll down to exam prep, because that's what we're focused on today. Click on that, explore exam prep by discipline, and go to orthotist and prosthetist. And here we are. This is where all of those materials lie, up and down the list, and there's just tons of information here. Please, we can't encourage you enough to take advantage of that. Now, Steve, what's the best way for listeners to reach out to you if they have any questions?
The best place to start, Jim, is to email us. And the best email address to use is simple, certification@abcop.org. And I can assure folks that our staff will review those in a timely manner and get an answer to you. We get all sorts of contacts with all sorts of questions. We have a great staff that will take that original email, figure out if they can answer it, and if they need others to help, they get that to those people, and we will respond in a very timely manner.
Very, very good. Now, anyone can also call us at 703-836-7114. ABC, click the ABC option and option number 2 for certification. But I want to emphasize again, Steve, that email, the certification@abcop.org, that's probably where you're going to get the quickest and best response. We also want to remind everyone that abcop.org/exam prep is where you're going to find all the materials themselves. Now, Steve, I want to thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and your helpfulness to assist all of the soon-to-be ABC certified practitioners on their way to successfully passing the O&P written multiple choice exam. They're going to be certified. I know they are. But thank you, Steve.
I always enjoy our time together, Jim. Thanks so much for organizing the webinar.
It's my pleasure. Now, I'd also like to ask everyone we'd love to hear your feedback and ask that if you have a few seconds to provide us with your thoughts and comments on this webinar. We would also like your input on what other topics you'd like to see for future webinars. We would appreciate that greatly. You can reach me at jlawson@abcop.org or at marketing@abcop.org. But once again, I want to reiterate that email above there, certification@abcop.org, is where you're going to be able to receive the help from the certification department. We thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful day.